Hello and welcome to Let's Talk Housing. This is Steven Haylestrom coming to you on 92.7 FM in Peterborough, as well as a regular weekly podcast. So thank you very much for coming back. And this week we have some very interesting things happening this week. Interviewing an educator about the effects of underhousing and homelessness on the population, specifically in Peterborough. And today is really a Peterborough focused kind of a day. So, next as well, we're going to talk to a young fellow, 16-year-old high school student, about what it's like to be 16 in a world where, geez, you have to actually think about being able to afford a place to live. That's a tough one. Well, we're going to get right on with it. And first off is going to be Nancy. So thank you. And please remember, everybody, if you'd like to be interviewed or you have something to say about housing, please reach out. There are so many things happening. Government's talking about it, people talking about it every day in the news about the lack of housing, the lack of inaction, the lack. And, this is just one small part, one small way that we can at least talk about it. Thanks. Okay, here comes Jane, our first interview.
Hi, Jane. Welcome to Let's Talk Housing. And first off, just to kind of let people know where we are. So, Jane, you're in the Peterborough area, and you've lived there for a number of years. And maybe you can just tell the audience just a little bit, whatever you want to, about your life in Peterborough. And then, as you know, we're going to talk about housing and the situation the way it is, etc. So first off, let's just have a general chat if we can. So how's it going in Peterborough for you?
So I grew up in Peterborough. So, I've been here a long time. I moved away for about 8 years in my 20s, and I've been back since I've been in my 30s, and I've been living downtown for the last almost 20 years. So let's say about 18 years, right downtown. So I've seen the changes over time, and I do think we have a huge crisis here in Peterborough, and I hear that that's also reflected in many other communities as well. I know it's not just a Peterborough problem, but I think it reflects on what's going on as a society, and that we're really not having the necessary supports in place for people, for many people. And so I just, we've always had some homelessness. You always see some of that, but never like it is now.
So how is it? Sorry to interrupt, but it's really great to have your perspective over 20 years. So if we talk about the homeless population, like the people on the street, and really I like to kind of think of this whole challenge in different levels, right? Because you've got people who are on the street who are kind of really at the very bottom part of it, or almost. There's even worse than that, but at the bottom. And then you have people who are, who exist by couch surfing or visiting at friends or moving from place to place. And then you have people who are underhoused. Like I spoke with somebody who, on Kijiji, people are renting, the top bunk of, in a hallway of, and wow. So there's all these different levels. So it'd be interesting if you wouldn't mind, just like your perspective. So how has it changed in Peterborough? Like what?
Yeah, I'd say when, let's say, in the last 20 years, you would see an occasional homeless person downtown, let's say if you were walking. But now, and so for the last, I don't know how many years, it's just a steady increase where I know people that won't go downtown anymore because they don't feel safe. And being sort of more accosted. I mean, I guess because there's just so many people and they're more and more desperate, being approached much more, and sometimes a little bit, I don't know if I want to say aggressively, but sort of more like, do you have this and do you have this, and sort of more demanding in a way, I guess. Yeah. Which, I don't know. And I just feel like before, like I felt, I don't know, it would just be like a couple people here and there. So sometimes I'd go into No Frills, for example, and somebody might be out front and they might say like, can you give me some money or whatever, and sometimes I'd say, well, would you like something to eat? And maybe what would you like? And so when I'd go in shopping and I'd get them crackers and cheese or something that they wanted, and then I'd give it to them on my way out. And they'd say thank you, but that would just be once in a while. And then it got so bad around No Frills that like they have a full-time security guard there now to move people along. That wasn't the case 10 years ago.
Right. Yeah. And just as an aside, one of the things that inspired me to do this program, quite frankly, was in Peterborough. I drove with my family into the Tim Hortons, right on George Street.
Yeah.
I just drove in the parking lot to turn around, and I noticed a fellow. Like, there were a number of people who were obviously homeless that were kind of hanging around, and but I noticed a fellow who was lying on the sidewalk right in front of the windows of the Tim Hortons, and I just looked at him long enough to notice that he wasn't like a kind of a regular expectation of a homeless person. He was looked like someone who, had a job and a life and a home, maybe a month ago. And,
right.
And now he didn't.
Yeah.
And because he was like a middle-aged guy.
Right.
And I thought, wow, that's what's different for me.
And I think it's the drug use that's different too, and the drugs that are available. Because now you're seeing people, this is the other layer of it, and this is like there's so many layers. I mean, if there was an easy fix, we would have come to it by now, right? Like, this is really complicated. And it's going to cost a lot of money, and it's going to need a lot of support on so many levels. And I'm an educator, and so I can see even from that perspective where supports need to be put into place. But coming back to how it's changed, I'm seeing people that are spun out, like drugged out in ways that we did not see before, just sort of like out of their minds. And I think it's the type of drugs that are available now. Before, you could kind of, like, you see, maybe you might be drunk or a little bit maybe stoned, but it was different. Like, sometimes you look at somebody and you're like, okay, this is different what they're on right now. This is like, I don't know, like I never really feel, it's not that I feel unsafe, but before I never felt unsafe, even with homeless people, or I just felt sorry for everybody, basically. And now I still feel sorry for them, but sometimes now I'm like, I actually don't know what you're on and what you're looking at me, but I don't know what you see. Like, you could think I'm whatever and attack me. Like, I have no idea. So it's more.
It's scary.
It's scarier, yeah. And I mean, I have a son who works in a cafe downtown and regularly wakes up and moves along homeless people from that place early in the morning. And I'm like, is this like, this is like wild that this is your reality. And he's just calmly going about it, like, because that's his reality now. This is how he's grown up.
Right. And if we just focus on the drug use for a second, what is your thoughts on, like, this? I call it like this slippery slope. It's like if it focus, like if I think about that fellow that I saw in Tim Hortons, now in the world today, it seems as though this slope to that world that you're describing of heavy drug use, of, just taking anything in order to escape, if I can put it that way, seems, what are your thoughts? Do you think people just, go, hey, I'm going to be homeless. I'm just going to, I'm just going to hang out at Tim Hortons and get stoned. And, or what do you think happens? Like, just what's your opinion? What do you think? How do you think all these people get there?
The honest truth, I actually think, I don't think anybody wants to go down that road intentionally. I think it is like a slippery slope where they're, doing some recreational drugs, and then they kind of get into more things. And some of these things, as soon as you take it once, like, you're hooked and you're messed. Like, but we also have a very strong pharmaceutical industry who I think is overprescribing a lot of very dangerous drugs. And I think people sometimes get hooked that way. And that's like, these people who maybe were living a fairly regular life and being okay. And they maybe had procedures done and maybe needed pain management and ended up on various things. Like, that's a whole other topic. But I think that's real. And I think there's quite a body of support for that. And I'm no expert on that, but I think so. I think we have, that the healthcare system is like a whole other thing, right? So I don't think we're there sometimes with what we prescribe.
No, and I think that there is that's absolute truth. I think that the drugs have been overprescribed, especially pain medication. And there's lots of evidence. I'm certainly not speaking out of turn in saying that, or it's not a conspiracy theory or something like that. That's why there's been so much emphasis on the reduction of especially opioid prescriptions. OxyContin used to be, you'd stub your toe and they would prescribe OxyContin. And as somebody who many years ago, when I was hurt very badly, I had, I took morphine. It's great, it's a pretty fabulous drug.
Yeah,
once you get, it makes the pain go away. And, I can certainly understand and relate to how easy it is. And I think that, but the other side of it, and if I can ask, as you have this personal experience, and I know you're of course, I know you're a woman, and for women, it can really be more unsafe and also feel much more unsafe. And so I wonder whether a part of this is that the way people are reacting on the street with you. Tell me a little bit about feeling unsafe and the amount of, how that has changed in the last few years. It really does have a different feel to it, I understand.
It does. It's just like I said, it's just the frequency, the amount of the sheer volume, I guess, of people that are there in various places downtown, and more sort of like I said, the types of things that people are on just seems a little bit more extreme and unpredictable. Like, these drugs are really messing people up. Like, you can see people who've been on it for a while, like, their faces are distorted. Like, they're just so, they're so out of their minds in different ways than they ever were before. So that it's very unpredictable. But there's a lot of congregating in larger groups as well, right? So if you're walking by yourself and there's a larger group, well, that's always more intimidating too than when it was just a single person on their own before, because things can happen in groups more than like when you're the only one, right? So like right around, walking over the train bridge to East City, often there's a congregation right around there. Or so if it's at night as well, you just feel like, okay, I'm not really sure if this is a safe place anymore for me to be. And the same with my kids, right? Like I always gave them a lot of freedom, and now I'm more like, okay, when are you coming home? You got to walk with somebody, or okay, I've got to go pick you up. Have your phone in your hand, like all these things that I didn't really have to think about before.
Right. Yeah. It's very
Also,
disconcerting.
what's interesting as well is sometimes like I'll give somebody something, and then they right away say, okay, and now can you get me this, and can you give me this, and can you give me this? And I'm like, no, actually, I just gave you this. Like, it doesn't make you.
Right.
I mean, I'm not expecting gratitude, and like I get, like it's not like, okay, like we're talking. This is a very different situation. It's not like I'm like, oh, thank you. Like I get it. They're in this, like, but it also then makes you kind of be like, all right, well, I don't know what else to say to you right now. Like it doesn't leave a very nice feeling, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, when you're trying to kind of, but
yeah,
and then you're,
and I'm sorry, I talked over you. What was that last?
No, that's okay.
Yeah, and I understand. I mean, I have the same experiences, and so if we stick to this just for another moment in Peterborough, because I know in Peterborough the encampment on Wolf Street, I think it is,
yes.
on Wolf Street, where they've been working on getting, tiny homes, tiny shacks put in for people. Do you think that that's a viable solution? Do you think that that's something, or do you think it was just a reaction to satisfy the neighborhood?
Well, and I don't think that reaction is satisfying the neighborhood either, actually. But I don't know what the answer is, and I do believe that there is the housing first model does make sense. Like I do think that people, first of all, getting over any addiction is like it's unbelievably difficult. Like it's and I think these kinds of drugs too. If substance use is the reason that they're on the street, and I know that there's other reasons. So like we talked about, there's very different situations going on. But let's say it's that, or alcoholism, or trauma, whatever it is. Those are really complex problems, and I think even more complex now given the types of drugs that people are on. And I do agree that in the best of situations, like with so much support, it's really hard to come off of any of that. Like for a person who has a huge family network and support financially, it's still the hardest thing ever. Like lots of people can't do it. So to expect those issues to be solved when they don't have a place to stay, like it's not going to happen. So housing first for sure. I'm not sure. I'm very interested to see how this plays out with these tiny homes, because I just like, what kinds of supports are there going to be there? Like, is there really going to be enough support? Like, we're talking like hundreds of thousands of dollars, and those are for people who even want to get help. And then is living in a tiny home in the community, which is a no barriers housing, right? So there will be lots of drug use. There will be lots of alcoholism. There will be all of that going on right there. Is that really where you're going to be able to pull yourself out of this? Like, I don't know how that's going to go, but I do agree that they can't just keep living in tents. And obviously, they need washroom facilities and like all those things. Like, these are humans. So, but I honestly, I don't think anybody knows. I think they're just like, okay, we've got to do something. Let's try this first. But no, I don't think it's going to work, quite frankly. But
personally, I think they know. It's not that they don't know what they need to do, because it seems obvious to me what needs to be done. It seems obvious to you and to everybody what needs or should be done. But the problem, like with these, and I really, really hesitate to call them tiny homes, because they're not homes.
No,
they're basically they're a shed.
Yeah.
I mean, I was involved in the process when they were making the decision on what product to buy.
Yes.
And these are sheds.
Yeah.
And so it's just a replacement for a tent.
Right.
It's barely what's called, kind of in the homeless industry as transitional housing. It's barely that.
Right.
And although you're absolutely right, the housing first, I'm a very big proponent of housing first, because I think people have to have a home. But you've hit the nail on the head with saying, well, what are the supports that are available, right? Like, how do you then, okay, so the people have a place to live, and then what's next? And that's where the rubber hits the road, it seems, especially around, like providing funding for these things, because without those supports, and I think you said it exactly right. Like, if you're a family that's reasonably well off, and you have a child or a sibling that ends up with a drug problem, then you can provide them with with the supports, and not only the emotional support, but the monetary support to help them get into the rehabilitation centers, or the whatever, like all of these different facilities that are available, but they just aren't available for people who have kind of hit the very bottom. I mean, that's why I'm struggling to remember who is going to do the work there. I know they've designated now one of the groups to look after those supports, and the name is not popping into my head. But anyway, yeah. And so in Peterborough, you think one of the first things that needs to be done is dealt with the street itself, right, from a housing point of view, just to make life safer. And how about, sorry?
Yes, I said absolutely.
Yeah. And how about, now you said you're an educator, but do you find that there is, because Peterborough is also a university town, and how are students coping? I've heard certainly that there's a big international student body in Peterborough, and also I've heard that there's like a zero rental vacancy rate, or near zero rental vacancy rate, and that rents are pretty high. So how is that level of people doing?
I don't know. Like, I don't know what they're doing. I have heard from, like, across Ontario, I've heard of universities and colleges saying to their international students, like, if you can't find housing, don't come, which will have huge ramifications for our colleges and universities across Ontario, because they rely on the international students' tuition, right? Like, those are often what's keeping a lot of our colleges and universities really, really going. So there's that whole layer that something could kind of happen there. But I can't speak to, like, I don't know how they're doing with finding housing. Like, I have a couple of friends who have kids here. They have found housing. But I mean, the thing is, it's a landlord's market, right? So they can pick and choose who they want. And a lot of landlords like students, actually. So in terms of, like, if you were to choose between students and, let's say, a family or someone who's trying to transition up, or from a very precarious situation who's maybe dealing with these other things, landlords are going to choose the students. They're not going to want to deal with, right? So that, like, is another, so in our town, when there is vacancy, students are going to get those over some of these people who are trying to, who are in that precarious group that can't afford much, could end up on the street, maybe are in the shelter system. Like, they're just walking that fine line of, that's even harder for them, right? Because that's who they're competing against too.
Right. Okay. So let me, because I don't want to use up your whole day talking about this, which I could probably do. But one of the things I really like to ask everybody who I talk to on this program is, what do you think, and this time let's start at kind of the top, like with the housing shortage and the housing cost, do you see any solutions? Have you heard from anybody or just yourself? Like, just what could governments do something more? Could people do something more just about the cost of housing and the shortage of actual houses? Like, there's actually very few developments of any size going on in Peterborough. There's very few like mid-rise rental apartments. I don't know. Right. I haven't seen anything going up. Yeah. So what do you think?
I think first of all, even the price of housing in itself, right, is crazy. So people like me, for example, people in our sort of bracket who maybe would have bought another home, a duplex or a triplex or something, and rented it out. A lot of people can't. Well, first of all, even if they can do that, even if you could afford buying another house, which most people can't now that the market is the price of the house is so incredibly high. Even if you did, you'd have to pay you'd have to charge so much rent to try to make your mortgage. It's just ridiculous. Like, this house that we're living in even is, who knows what would it go for now? 600, 700,000. We bought it for 160. Like, it's not sustainable. So there's that whole problem with the price of housing just being ridiculous, which is like a whole other thing. Like, even our kids, like, will they ever be able to buy a house? Like, I'm not sure that they will. So that doesn't even touch the homelessness population or the people who are in that income where they're really precarious. But it makes it impossible to have reasonable rent. So I think there has to be a funding from the government for people, first of all, to be able to build developments, to be able to go up, and rules about that. Like, they have to be geared to income or low income, because a lot of the buildings that have gone up are like luxury, where they're charging like $3,000 rent or something, or over $2,000. Like, so that's not addressing it. That's just making the problem worse. But I don't know the legalities of what's involved in all of that, but that's like from the top down. My suspicion is that there's a lot of people getting really rich, and that there's a lot of people who are benefiting from all of this. So there's that, right? We have to actually be able to get housing for people, and then it has to be subsidized for people to be able to access, and it has to be available. But then, like all those other supports have to be in place, because nobody wants to rent to somebody who's going to like wreck it and, like be on drugs all the time. Like, I don't know. It's such a tricky thing. But that's where all those social supports that should be in place from as the educator of young children, I can already predict, because of the families, who's going to be in trouble. And I also can predict based on some very serious learning challenges that aren't being addressed. And so even as an educator, we could put so much more support into these young kids. And our education system is so strapped that those kids are falling through the cracks all the time.
Yeah.
And same thing. Healthcare, same thing. Policing, same thing. Like, there's just so many. Well, maybe not policing, same thing. I don't know what's going on with policing, but I know that there's like, I don't know why there's so many drug houses around. But anyway, that's a whole other issue.
I think policing is the least of the problems. But first off, I just want to confirm for you, when you made the comment saying, I think people are getting rich on this, selling luxury condos, I will confirm that for you. As a person who's in the industry, they have, for a number of years, people been taking advantage of the dramatic increases in housing to take more profit. And part of those people, though, is also the governments themselves, because the cost of development, like the development fees, are very high as well. Although, and the development industry tries to say, well, that's why everything is so much more expensive. But it's not accurate. And that's a whole different story, which I actually talk about ad nauseum on this show, that, the construction / development housing industry could do a lot more to support all of this. And I think that the concept of providing support for housing, like the government, and now they are starting to offer, CMH through CMHC, there are some programs, but as usual, the programs seem to be more focused on telling you what they're going to give you, from a construction or development point of view or a mortgage point of view, rather than giving it to you, because they make it so hard to get the resources. They announce the same $1 million over and over and over again, but never actually give it to anybody. So that part of it's quite hilarious. And the other thing I would add to your comment is that as far as the rental thing, and really as when we first started talking, is that it's all about transition, right? Like you definitely have to have a different type of housing for people who have managed to make it to the street. And then because they need to transition into housing, supportive housing, that then can support them to be educated. And it was really wonderful to hear you say about education as a whole, because that's really, I often talk / rant about how our governments don't support the family enough, in education. Like, why is it that young people, that like right now if you're looking for a job, if you don't have at least a bachelor, like a degree, a university degree, then nobody will even look at you. And so why our system doesn't pay for that part of the education, I'm not sure. And anyway, I won't get into my own rant about the whole education thing.
But it's part of the problem, 100%, right? And then also kind of housing. One other thing I would say too is there are a lot of people like us, who have properties that were bought at lower levels that have also, because they can charge higher rent, do. And that's across the board. And so that makes it the people who were on the fringe who just needed reasonable rent, and do quite well. If their rent's reasonable, they work, and but people who could slip into that system, potentially if things, go wrong for them, it makes it, there's not very many places available. So, for example, when we rented our upstairs, we always had the rent very reasonable, and it was sort of our mandate that people could buy housing from our place. And pretty much everybody who ever lived up there went from our place, they saved, and were able to buy a house. And our other property, our rent is crazy low because we've had the same people forever. It's $1,200 for a 4-bedroom house. Plus heat and hydro, right? So yes, we could go and keep being or get them out and try to charge more, whatever. But it's just, to me, it's just greedy. I'm just it's fine. It's just sitting there. It's just breaking even. Just leave it. But people don't do that too. Just mind you, it's probably not people like us that should be doing that. It's again, the people who are really wealthy should be the ones that are actually keeping their rent reasonable because they actually can afford to. But I do feel like that too, it's just driven everything. So everybody's taking advantage, right? Everybody is. Not only when you buy a new house now, you have to, like I said, you have to charge high rent because you can't make it work. But all the people who have all these houses have just been I can just, every time that somebody moves out, I'm moving the rent up to whatever I want. And it's just driving everything so crazy. I just think it's greedy. But I know that's not a popular opinion. But I don't know. It's not popular, but it should be. And the other part of it, and one of the people I interviewed was talking about that, is that the whole concept that people are changing the way they look at housing, and they look at it as an investment rather than a home. So they will look to say, okay, well, I'm going to buy, and this is what's happened, I'll buy 2 or 3 houses and rent it out. And then unfortunately they don't take the same path that you have, which is to
look at how they're going to, or they look at the investment as the way that they make their money by the increase in their asset value of the house. So instead, they look and say, hey, I can get another $1,000 a month just by kicking this person out and putting it up for rent for $1,000 more, because that's what the market will bear. And and that is exactly right. That's just greed. Yeah.
I think so. And so I have a problem with that. But then again, I do think, like the people at the top, which is actually, okay, so just on to something else too. And I know I do have to go soon, but I just wanted to say as well, I do think that even like the support, so this is a totally different, I'm really jumping here. So, and I hope that's okay.
Right.
But the methadone clinics that we have here in Peterborough, I understand that's a necessary thing to help people. Okay, I get that. But you can't tell me that there's not somebody way up there making a ton of money from that too. Like, I think the whole business of the whole business of homelessness, even there's people making money off of this. I just always feel like follow the money, just keep following the money and find out what's going on. And there you're going to probably figure out a solution too. If you can follow the money, somebody somewhere, there are people that are profiting. There's always people profiting, and there's always, we can solve it by spending money, but people won't spend the money, right? So I don't know, it makes me so frustrated.
Yeah, well, in conclusion, and this is talk about wandering off the subject, but it reminds me very much of during the time Stephen Harper was Prime Minister, they brought to his attention the lack of clean water in Indigenous communities. And right at the beginning of his 10 years in office.
Right.
And he spent 10 years and I think a total of about $30 million on consulting firms to figure out that there was a problem with clean water in Indigenous communities.
Right.
And it's a very interesting thing that you say, and I think I'm going to actually steal your thought and follow some of that money because I agree. It's like now, you've heard of the military infrastructure in the U.S. and how it has to be supported all the time by more wars. Well, here you go. Maybe the same thing is going to happen in the homelessness community, where they're going to have more homelessness to support the, all the infrastructure. It's terribly ridiculous. It
is ridiculous.
Yeah.
I wanted to just say one more thing about the education system, because I really do believe, as you do, that this is the heart of so much. Because sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit, but like our approach to homelessness has to be so multi-tiered and multifaceted. Like, yes, we have to deal with what's currently going on for sure. We also really have to look at prevention, and what's leading and getting right to the roots of it. And so trying to prevent this from happening and continuing with future generations. And I mean, so as a kindergarten educator, I see the families that have come in that have had no support. They have special needs children, and there's nothing going on for them. And I can see the trajectory of what's going to happen with those children. But
sorry to cut you off, Jane, but we've just run out of time. I'm going to bring this big conclusion of Jane's in on our next program next week. In the meantime, I'm going to bring you our next guest, Lucas. Very sorry for the cutoff, but I got to make my 1 hour.
Hello, and thank you for having me here, Steven. My name is Lucas, and I'm 16, living in Peterborough, Ontario right now. And it's great to be on the show with you here, Steven.
Thank you. Yeah, no problem. And you're in school right now then, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, and you're in, grade 12, right?
That's right, grade 12.
Okay, so you're graduating from our public education system this year? And, sorry, I tend to talk over top of people. My apologies.
Oh,
so,
no worries. I do the same sometimes.
Yeah, and so you're kind of at the beginning of your career and your life. So, as you know, this show is all about housing, and really, I'm trying to get an understanding both from a Peterborough point of view and from a young person's point of view. Like, it is like when I was your age, I wasn't really thinking at all about, I don't even think I had a thought about, getting an apartment or buying a house or anything like that. Does any of that occur to you or any of your friends nowadays with all of this stuff on the radio and in the media all the time?
Yeah, actually, it is something that I've talked about with friends before, and it's a very worrying situation currently.
Really? So what is between you and your friends, what is it you worry about? What do you give me a little insight into it.
Well, it's like every time it's talked about, the rate of inflation for housing costs continues to go up at an extremely disproportionate rate to the increase of, let's say, minimum wage, right? Like, wages are not going up as much as housing costs are. And for people who are only really working minimum wage jobs right now and trying to save up money, it's very worrying to kind of try to think about owning any sort of property in future.
Right. That must feel almost overwhelming when you think about, because I don't know if you're aware, but in the Toronto area, and really almost the same in Peterborough, the average cost is $1 million for a house, and in order to support a house, that means that you need to be putting out, between $4,500 and $5,200 a month. So, do any of your friends think they're going to be able to, or do you think you'll currently ever be able to own a house?
Gosh, I mean, if it keeps increasing at this rate, maybe not. There's a lot of places that aren't really giving out work right now. And I know I've got a lot of friends who are trying to apply for jobs, and they're unable to get jobs, and I do work. I do have jobs right now. So I am making money, but not at any sort of rate that would get me into some good housing soon, right? It's one of those things. It's I'm not really sure what it'll look like in future, and so it's very uncertain with trying to make a plan for owning housing. If that makes sense.
Yeah. No, it does, and it's a very, very important point. Is that it doesn't allow you to kind of think about the future, to plan and say, hey, I might want to have a family, I might want to have a house, things that for people in previous generations, certainly, that was kind of a regular part of what you thought about. Certainly when you're at the end of high school and beginning going to university and that sort of thing.
Yeah. No, I having kids in this kind of economy right now. It just doesn't seem like a good idea.
Yeah. It seems quite out of reach, I guess, is the way to say it. So how is it? So you say you work, right? So
yeah.
You're living in Peterborough. The other thing I have participated in is recently with the City Council of Peterborough was that there's a big concern in Peterborough about homelessness and the amount of homeless people. And I think you and I have talked before about, I've done projects before where I've created what's called transitional housing for people who are on the street. But what is your thought about what's happening in Peterborough right now if we talk about housing and go right to the bottom of the pile of people who are kind of the first who need housing. What's your experience of it so far in Peterborough?
Oh, wow. Well, I'm living like right downtown, so I'm kind of in the heart of it all. And so there isn't really ever a day when I don't see it. Like whether it's in the mornings at work when the Silver Bean is open. And like it's just something you kind of see everywhere. If you're walking downtown, you'll see it. If you're down by the water, you see it. Really anywhere in Peterborough, you're going to walk by it. And there's a lot of it, right? And so I know that they've said that they're trying to work towards transitional housing. Like Peterborough has said that, but whatever current efforts are being taken don't seem to be enough because there hasn't really been any change, and it's only really gotten worse recently. Like since the pandemic, I've really noticed that it's kind of gotten worse.
And is it because often people who are homeless, people who are living rough, are characterized in a certain way, right? Like that they have a drug problem, they have a mental illness problem, and people kind of, in my mind anyway, they kind of forget that you may end up on the street because of those problems. You weren't born with the problem, right? Like there's a lot that happened prior to you being in that position. So I heard you say it sounded like you said you were working, and it sounded like maybe a restaurant or something. So do you ever encounter, like, what is your personal experience if you encounter a person, they're asking for money, I believe, or food or something? Is it something that worries you? Like, are you frightened, or your safety you feel uncomfortable? Like, what is it, just from a personal point of view? How does it feel?
Well, no, I never feel like unsafe or uncomfortable around them. When you really stop to talk to these people, they're often really peaceful and they're really kind and just like they're good people just in really difficult situations. And of course it's a case by case scenario. Like there are some people where it's like you would want to be cautious, but people often treat it like you said, stereotyping it. People are very cautious of it and don't even take a sec to survey it, I guess. Survey that situation, and they just treat all homeless people like they're going to be drug addicts. Right.
Or that they're not worthwhile. That's what I have certainly found. Is that I mean, the thing I certainly thought of when I first became involved in work with a homeless community is I just always picture a little baby, right? And I think, like everybody just started out as this, everybody kind of starts out the same. And but then the circumstances change, whether they're family circumstances, their financial circumstances, and it seems to change. And then suddenly, and then the other thing is that I've certainly heard talked about many times is that many people are just like, as they say, like a paycheck away from being on the street. And I'm certainly glad to hear you say that you understand that not everybody who's on the street's out to get you, so to speak, or that they're not all bad people, because often that's the response I get when I talk to people about this. So in Peterborough, you mentioned also that they're working on transitional. Have you heard anything about that, like what they're doing? Have you kept up with that in the news as well?
I haven't heard very many updates about it. I know that the city's like trying to work towards it. That's all I've heard, is that they're trying to work towards it. I've heard that from various people. I haven't really heard it from news outlets. So I'm not entirely sure what's going on with it. But like, I'm hoping that I'm hoping that they're working towards it.
Yeah, and have you heard about this Wolf Street encampment?
Oh yes, no, I've seen it. I've been like, there are some things that oh man, let me restart that sentence. There have been times when I've had to like walk by it, or my family's been driving by it, and you see it, and it's not like just some small section. It's like a pretty large section, and there's a lot of people there.
Yeah, I think there's like 120 people living in there right now. Yeah. And so what's your family's reaction to that when you drive by? Is it no, sorry, you go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, it's just kind of sad, right?
Yeah.
It's sad to know that there's so many people who don't have homes and are like really struggling right now in this economy. I'm in Peterborough.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting you just said that, in this economy. But is it real? I often think, and I would like your thoughts on it as well, is that, is it really like the economy, or is it the structure of the economy? Meaning that, is it that there's, is it that there's no business going on and that there's no economic activity, or is it that the money from all the economic activity just doesn't reach regular people?
I would say the structure, because overall it's not like it is like very significant here in Peterborough, but you hear about homelessness everywhere. Like anywhere you go, really, you're going to see it. It's just not in the numbers we have here in Peterborough. But like, there's so many people who are well off, and they're doing very well, and they're benefiting from this economy. And it just seems that it's like people who are currently higher up are benefiting a lot more from the economy than people who are at the bottom.
Right. So it's like the distribution of wealth is what I've heard it called, right? So there is lots of wealth out there, but it's not going anywhere but to the top.
Yeah.
Yeah. And who from your perspective, when you see that, because obviously you're in the know enough to know that, but who do you see being able to change that, and how do you see it being changed? Do you have any ideas on that?
Well, I know that there are people who are trying to make change, and they're trying to be proactive in the community. I know someone who I go to school with, and he's trying to organize. He helps organize groups of people. I believe he puts up posters in places. He's like trying to politically take action to helping these like people who are a little worse off. But he's trying to help, but he doesn't seem to have been able to make any progress with it, So people want to be able to help, and people are trying to get results, but I don't quite know how those results are going to arrive.
Yeah, do you see, just as an aside, I'd like at some point, if you wouldn't mind, to introduce me to the fellow, and maybe he'll talk on the show.
That would be great.
I might be able to assist. But then, how do you feel, like you certainly come across somebody who might, is politically savvy, or you understand. Do you see the politicians, like either the municipal or federal or provincial politicians, doing anything to understand or to, really do anything about these problems?
I can't say I know enough about that to give a good answer.
Okay,
I know I haven't
enough.
heard anything about that, but...
Yeah, fair enough. That's okay. Hey, and so let me ask you kind of my, it's like my favorite question is, so just from your point of view, what do you see as some solutions, like whether they're political or physical or combination? Like if you could just wave a magic wand and go poof there, what do you think are the top 3 or 4 things, or 1 or 2, whatever you got for me, that you think you could do?
Oh, man. I would have to say, like, a reform of how the economy works. Like, when you've got people like CEOs of companies making, like, hundreds and hundreds of times the wage of, like, some of their workers, like some of their lowest workers, you have to stop and think, like, what is it that these CEOs are doing that makes them deserve so much more? And I know people are saying, like, oh, they founded the company, or they're helping run the company. But if all you had was a CEO and no workers, the company couldn't run. It relies so much heavier on these lower workers than it does the CEOs. So I would have to say a more even distribution of payment, or a more fair distribution of payment through companies would have a large impact.
Yeah, I agree. And it used to be that an average CEO would make, I think it was like 24 times what the lowest paid person was paid, right? And now it's like 150 times. And yeah, you're exactly right. That's certainly one. And from my point of view, I always say to people, I don't know, if you're making $1 million a year, like, how much more money do you need to make than that? Like, what are you going to do?
Exactly.
How many cars are you going to drive, for goodness sake? Anyway, I don't want to repeat that because I say that line every time I interview anybody, and it's going to go over and over. Anyway, sorry. Anyway, continue. That's a very good point.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Probably, like, making it easier for people who don't have a lot of work experience to get more work experience, right? Or what is it? There was this thing I'd heard about where some jobs needed, like, some kind of proof of residence for applying for a job, which, as you can imagine, probably wouldn't be the best for, let's say, people who are homeless, right? Because there is no proof of residence. So those jobs become inaccessible to people who really need to make money, or are trying to get themselves out of a situation that they're in.
Right.
And so, yeah, probably like more fair hiring or more accessible job opportunities is what I would say.
Yeah, that's very good. Almost like, instead of transitional, or as well as transitional housing, you have to have transitional employment as a way to move people forward. I like that idea. Good one. And okay, anything else?
I think that's everything. I don't think I have anything else to say about it.
And that's it for our show today. Thank you, Lucas and Jane, for your contribution. This is Steven Haylestrom from Let's Talk Housing. Hope to hear from anybody, and hope you're listening. Take care. Bye for now.